Mysteries are used in stories to keep the overall plot engaging by being thought-provoking, making you question and theorize what twists that are surely to arise, and this show sure did get me questioning a lot of things. Lord of Mysteries is a bit of a complicated series. It started as a web novel released back in 2018 by Wen Ye, or Cuttlefish as others know him by, but as it was quite popular, it's not surprising that it was recently adapted into a 13-episode series. So it was no doubt that I decided on watching it after seeing the amount of praise the web novel was getting, and I will say, when I got to watching the first episode, it was one of the most complicated, bizarre, confusing first episodes of anything I've ever watched. It felt like an overload of information being told much too quickly. It felt like every sentence was some important information I had to remember. It went from scene to scene, not giving me enough time to process what the hell was going on. Luckily, the other episodes aren't as bad, still confusing, but not to the extent episode 1 was like. But from what I understood from the first episode is that it's an isekai of some sorts, even though it hardly feels like one. Basically, our main character is a transmigrator who transferred his soul into another person from a parallel world, Klein Moretti, who supposedly attempted to commit suicide but miraculously lives, which could be due to having a completely different soul and now being a completely different person taken on the form of Klein Moretti, or something like that. I may get some points wrong with how hard it is to understand certain parts at times. Yet as he is now Klein Moretti, he finds himself stuck in an alternate version of the Victorian steampunk era in the 1300s, even though the Victorian era was in the 1800s, which is why it's an alternate version on a different timeline. While Klein is in this timeline, he hopes to somehow go back to his world with some kind of method, a method that possibly utilizes the magical elements in this show, which is the main premise of this story. It's an intriguing system. To obtain these powers, people drink potions, and all these potions correspond to one of the 22 different pathways one may choose, each having levels one must increase if wanting to become stronger. Each pathway sequence begins at level 9. The lower it is, the stronger it gets. The way the powers work is due to spiritual power, and many needing to be cast with rituals or chants. All these powers differ depending on which pathway the user chooses. These power wielders are called Beyonders. Klein hopes to obtain these powers to get them strong enough to figure out a way to get back home. It's a very intricate system that I hope I described well enough, yet I should have, since the series starts off every episode explaining the power system. It is definitely a part that had me very interested. It is very perplexing to understand the ins and outs of the pathways, but it sure adds uniqueness to the world, especially being set in an old-fashioned era. Later in the story, Klein joins a Beyonder group called the Nighthawks, a hidden organization that deal with spirits and demons around the area with their Beyonder magic, keeping the group's identity hidden by acting as a security company. You see as the group solve mysteries, uncovering secrets, facing an abundance of foes, and one of the absolute biggest strengths of this series is the animation, and how it is especially used in the action segments. I feel like I've been saying it often how impressive animation within this type of media has gotten recently, but it just shows how far animation has come to create absolute masterpieces of art, and Lord of Mysteries is no exception. It mixes 3D and 2D to have the action be as solid and refreshing as possible, to not limit itself to stick to only a single style. It works incredibly well, is visually pleasing with stunning fast-paced movements, keeping the fights engaging, having a great blend of colours to add more to its already appealing art style. It always keeps it interesting and original between each fight. I may not know what's going on half the time with how perplexing the abilities can be, yet I was still enjoying my time with it all. Yet it does still use CGI to set its location, to show it in several perspectives, to see it in such a grand scale, to really show off this old-timely world. The 3D can look off at some points, but for the most part it works extremely well. but I love the entire aesthetic. It's so creative and different. Seeing this Victorian type era and how this story structures itself with its atmosphere. Many of its scenery and structures are highly impressive. I've never been more fascinated with architecture in a show, especially the Nighthawk's base of operation. It has so much to it that creates an unforgettable location that you'll get familiar with throughout the storyline, and it keeps adding to make it continuously fascinating, never feeling dull. The entire aesthetic and everything it set out to do adds so much to the overall experience. Though as many strengths this series has, it still has a few flaws that stood out to me. Firstly with the characters, though none of them are necessarily bad, just a good chunk were forgettable. It may be me, but I only remembered 2 or 3 characters' names, and it's a shame because I think a lot could be done if the characters were developed slightly more. I feel as if I can't fully immerse myself into the characters' stories, since they don't stand out enough. I could even say the same for the protagonist, Clay Moretti. I never felt fully immersed into his journey, since to start with, when he first gets introduced, there was already a billion of other things going on to get me completely distracted, so it took a while to understand him as a character, but as time went on, I realized that he was kind of boring. Like, he works as a protagonist, he's got everything that qualifies him as one. He's got his entire main goal to work toward throughout the story, he has a kind personality, he has some skillful fighting techniques with his seer beyond the power. Yet even with all this, it doesn't make his character engrossing. He's too perfect, and not in a good way. Clay doesn't have enough flaws about him for him to stand out and overcome. He just feels very simple. He isn't bad, but I did hope for a little more, especially being the main character. Nevertheless, what I find to be the biggest flaw of the series is what I mentioned before, on how annoyingly confusing everything is. Even though it does give an attempt to try and be understandable after the first episode, it still just kept adding more and more to the plot, without me understanding the parts before. It felt like a mess. It has a very deep lore, which I appreciate to add depth to the overall world, but it tells it in such a short span, and it got worse. The stupid amount of beyond the powers and pathways there are, all the abilities felt all jumbled, and it was hard to keep track on what each one did. Same with the magical artifacts, it was too much for my brain to handle. It's not like I couldn't understand what was happening at certain parts, it wasn't that bad, but when it comes to the overall story, I was severely bewildered. For a show called Lord of Mysteries, I thought the story would be more absorbing, getting you to think, coming up with ideas on how the secrets were going to unfold. The show still was a mystery as a whole, just not in the way I anticipated. It felt cluttered, with it constantly introducing new plot devices, much too quick for the audience to understand, and I had just as many questions as the season ended. It's not as if the season had to answer every question, but it at least had to get me curious on what the mysteries could be to look forward to a next season, but instead it was just complete nonsense to even think about. I could not get fully invested into its story. In spite of that, regardless of my complaints, I still do think Lord of Mysteries is a good show. The animation and action are high quality, it has neat ideas with its power system, even if it is a little confusing. The Victorian era style is something I've not seen done in many shows, and it's refreshing. So there is a lot to be had. If you're one for a plot with a deep lore and with complex writing, then you may get even more enjoyment out of it. Still, I'd recommend watching it even if you take a slight interest in all of its high quality ideas it provides.